Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Harry S. Truman and John F. Kennedy would dream if they were here tonight.
Lyndon Johnson was the president in 1964, and his opponent did what challengers usually do. He ran against that mess in Washington.
Graft. Swindles. Juvenile delinquency. Hear what Barry Goldwater has to say about our lack of moral leadership.
We, as a nation, are not far from the kind of moral decay that has brought on the fall of other nations and people.
In a television campaign that relied on half-hour speeches, Barry Goldwater painted a civilization on the verge of collapse, morally bankrupt at home, and threatened by a creeping communist menace abroad. Goldwater called for action.
I want American kids to grow up as Americans, and they will, if we have the guts to make our intentions clear. So clear they don't need.
But the central issue of the campaign, exploited by the Democrats, soon became Barry Goldwater's own intentions.
In your heart, you know he's right.
Democratic spots portrayed Goldwater as too far to the right of mainstream America. Their ammunition had been handed them by a bitterly divided Republican Party.
I don't know just why they wanted to call this a confession. I certainly don't feel guilty about being a Republican.
Lyndon Johnson was asked if he shouldn't label Goldwater an extremist. No, said the president. Moderate Republicans had done that for him.
I voted for Dwight Eisenhower the first time I ever voted. I voted for Nixon the last time. But when we come to Senator Goldwater, now it seems to me we're up against a very different kind of a man.
Barry Goldwater said, "Sometimes I think this country would be better off if we could just saw off the eastern seaboard and let it float out to sea."
Even his running mate, William Miller, admits that Senator Goldwater's voluntary plan would destroy your Social Security.
But the president did want to remind voters that Senator Goldwater had talked loosely about tactical nuclear weapons. After Goldwater had cracked that maybe we ought to lob one into the men's room of the Kremlin, bumper stickers said, "In your heart, you know he might." This spot never even mentioned Goldwater by name, but proved to be one of the most controversial in the history of advertising.
7, 6, 8, 9, 9.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
These are the stakes to make a world in which all of God's children can live, or to go into the dark. We must either love each other or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd. The stakes are too high for you to stay home.
I'm Ronald Reagan. Every American should hear what Barry Goldwater really has to say, not what a bunch of distorters of the truth would have you believe.
The actor Ronald Reagan came riding to Barry Goldwater's defense in one of his first nationally televised speeches. But neither he nor other Republicans could save the Goldwater campaign.
Our opponents are referring to us as warmongers. Well, Barry, in my mind, this is actual Tommy rot.
Even the beloved Ike couldn't no incumbent running for re-election. President Johnson retired over the stalemate in Vietnam, and the race was between Richard Nixon and Hubert Humphrey. This time it was the Democrats who fought openly at their convention, forcing Humphrey to lead a divided party. Outside, demonstrators clashed with Chicago police. These scenes became part of the network's campaign coverage. In the public mind, Vice President Humphrey shared the blame for the war in Vietnam, giving the Republicans an issue they exploited in spots like this one.
This time, vote like your whole world depended on it.
The Vice President of the United States.
We have seen the terrible results of violence in this country. It would be intolerable if a handful of violent people, and that is what it is, just a handful, could harden us against needed change. I've seen
At first, Humphrey's television spots pictured a man on the defensive. Instead of counterattacking, he stressed his accomplishments.
The 1964 Civil Rights Act, Medicare, the Job Corps, Project Head Start. Get behind the man behind them all. Hubert H. Humphrey for president.
Never has so much power been used so ineffectively as in Vietnam. If after all...
Nixon hammered at the Vietnam issue with emotional ads and an attractive promise.
I pledge to you, we shall have an honorable end to the war in Vietnam.
Some men will tell you anything. Mr. Nixon pledges he'll end the war in Vietnam. But Spiro Agnew says Nixon has no plan.
Trailing badly, the Democrats changed their advertising. They commissioned Tony Schwartz to produce a series of negative commercials attacking Nixon directly. Humphrey began to close the gap.
Some men will tell you anything to get the job, while other men are interested in the truth.
But it was too little, too late. Humphrey lost by less than one.
Marines? No, I was with the Americal Division. Oh, yeah. I had a son-in-law at Shulai.
Most of them were still safe in grade school when this man first spoke out against the war.
George McGovern's ad stressed his early opposition to the Vietnam War. Here, surrounded by veterans, he asked for their support.
I love the United States, but I love it enough so I want to see some changes made.
McGovern, right from the start.
The McGovern Defense Plan. He would cut the Marines by 1/3.
While McGovern talked about America, Nixon talked about McGovern.
Senator Hubert Humphrey had this to say about the McGovern proposal. It's cutting into the very security of this country. President Nixon doesn't believe we should play games with our national security. He believes in a strong America, to negotiate for peace from strength.
And you're saying that if he had gotten people to think about voting against Nixon, he might have done better than the one state he carried?
Exactly. And I did 5 commercials for McGovern that Larry O'Brien asked me to do. They ran only 2 of them. This was one that got on.
Well, either way, it won't be a disaster. What am I looking for? I mean, so I'll vote for Nixon. Why rock the boat? I'm not crazy about it. Never was. I gotta decide, though. I gotta make up my mind. I'm not crazy about McGovern. I don't have that much time. I can't keep people waiting. The fellas are voting Nixon. They expect me to vote for him, too. Me vote for Nixon. My father'd roll over in his grave. The fellas say they are. Maybe they're not. Crime? I don't feel safe. Prices up. Got a feeling. Don't vote for Nixon. Why am I confused? Who am I measuring McGovern against? Gut feeling. My gut feeling. McGovern. His hand voted for Kennedy. I mean, it's just possible. McGovern's straight. Maybe he can. That's the way.
Yes, Ford has made me feel proud to be an American. I think he's done a wonderful job for America. I'm feeling good about America. I'm feeling good about me.
If you were to take a candidate and let him stand on the most crowded corner in the world and shake hands with one person every 10 seconds, he couldn't shake hands in the whole campaign with a fraction of the people that will see one commercial where he can talk to them in their home directly and in a very modest way tell them something for 30 seconds or 60 seconds as opposed to shaking hands and not saying anything for 10 seconds.
I want a chance to give back to you the security and the hopes for tomorrow that inflation is stealing from you. With your help, we can do it. You can depend on it.
The campaign takes place in the living room now.
Not on the street.
Not on the street. And we're not interested in public speaking. We're interested in private speaking. I think that people know much more about candidates today than they did in the past.
And the commercials have been able to accomplish that education?
I think they're an important part of it. You know, people will say that, why can't we use the news and the discussion shows and the free media? You find then that the candidate loses control of his own campaign. He goes with what the interest of the newscaster is. He has to have control of his campaign. If he has the proper balance of his paid media, of the media he determines about himself. And isn't that what free speech means?
With the use of political commercials, does the best man win or the most telegenic?
I don't think it's either. You know, people will come to me and say, are you sure you work for the right candidate? You're a very powerful person in this realm. And I say that's an undemocratic question. The right candidate is not for me to decide, it's for the voters to decide.
You and I as voters also have to decide what we think of political spots. I'm ambivalent myself. I don't buy the argument that they undermine democracy. In a way, they serve democracy by reaching more people in a single instant than a whistle-stop campaign ever could, or a speech on the stump. When William Jennings Bryan was running for president,